A warship left its Stockholm mooring on the 10th of August, 1628, and covered roughly 1,300 meters. That is about 1,400 yards, a distance you could walk in 15 minutes. Then the Vasa sank. Everything about the ship's design, its cost, and its intended service life pointed toward decades of use. The archaeological record points to a single afternoon. That gap between what the Vasa was built to be and what it actually did is the reason it now sits at the center of one of the best documented shipwreck investigations anywhere. The construction record is narrow and specific. The Vasa was built between 1626 and 1628. For a vessel of that scale, that is a compressed window, and it matters for one reason that has nothing to do with drama. When archaeologists work with a shipwreck, the hardest problem is usually chronology. Timbers get reused, repairs blur the picture, cargo arrives from different decades, and a hull can carry material spanning a century. The Vasa does not have that problem. It was assembled inside a 2-year window and lost on a known calendar day. Almost nothing on board had time to be replaced, upgraded, or scavenged during service because there was no service. That single fact reframes the whole site. A successful warship accumulates decades of alteration. A ship that fails on its maiden voyage preserves the moment of its own completion. The Vasa is not primarily interesting because it sank. It is interesting because it sank before anything about it could change. But the site was not left untouched, and this is where the evidence chain gets more complicated than the simple story suggests. In the 17th century, salvagers went after the ship's bronze cannons and recovered most of them. Bronze was valuable. The guns were the single most concentrated store of value in the wreck, and they were extracted while the loss was still recent and the position still known. So the assemblage archaeologists eventually studied was already selectively stripped. The most militarily significant objects on the ship had been pulled out roughly 3 centuries before anyone applied modern method to the site. That is a documented gap in the record, not a mystery. Most of the Vasa's bronze cannons were removed in the 17th century, and then the ship disappeared from public memory. The supplied record describes this plainly. After the salvage, the Vasa fell into obscurity. This is the part of shipwreck history that gets least attention and explains the most. A wreck stops being a landmark when there is nothing left worth taking. Position knowledge lives in the heads of working sailors and salvagers, and it decays with them. Charts change, harbors get rebuilt, traffic patterns shift. The Vasa did not vanish because it was hidden. It vanished because the reason to remember its location had been removed along with its guns. By the 20th century, a large royal warship lay inside a working Swedish harbor, and no one was watching the spot. That is the detail that should stop you. When the ship was located again in the late 1950s, it was found in a busy shipping area of Stockholm harbor. Not a remote seabed, not deep water beyond reach, a place where vessels moved overhead constantly. The Vasa had been under active traffic for generations, in one of the most heavily used stretches of water in the region, and the accepted picture of that harbor simply did not include it. Relocating the wreck in the late 1950s changed the problem from search to recovery, and recovery took years. The ship was salvaged in 1961, and the supplied record is precise about the outcome. The hull came up largely intact. That phrase carries enormous weight for archaeology. An intact hull is not a collection of artifacts. It is a structure, with geometry that can be measured, joints that can be studied, and proportions that can be compared against documentary evidence. Wooden warships of the early 17th century usually survive as fragments, iron concretions, and scattered timber. Here, the object survived as an object. The interval is worth stating exactly, because it is arithmetic rather than estimate. The Vasa sank in 1628 and was raised in 1961. That is 333 years on the seabed. 3 centuries of immersion that ended with a hull described as largely intact. Why the wood endured that long is exactly the kind of question where a documentary should stop and mark the boundary. The evidence available here establishes the duration and the condition. It does not, by itself, explain the preservation mechanism. There are well-known environmental explanations offered for Baltic wrecks in general, but the record in front of us does not document them for this ship, and filling that gap with confident narration would be inventing a link. So the honest position is this: the preservation is verified. The cause is outside what this evidence can prove. The same discipline applies to the sinking itself. The date is documented. The distance is documented. The specific chain of design and loading decisions that produced the failure is not established by the material in front of us, and it belongs to a separate body of inquiry evidence. A ship that sank 1,300 meters into its first voyage clearly failed. Naming the exact mechanism requires records this evidence chain does not contain. The failure is fact. The explanation at this level of evidence remains open. Recovery also created a cost that most people never associate with archaeology, and the museum history makes it visible. After 1961, the Vasa was not put straight into a permanent building. It went into a temporary museum called Wasavarvet, and it stayed there until 1988. That is 27 years in an interim facility. Then it moved permanently to the Vasa Museum in the Royal National City Park in Stockholm. Read that sequence as an engineering statement rather than a timeline. Lifting a waterlogged 17th-century hull out of the sea does not end the problem. It transfers it. Once removed from the environment that preserved it for 333 years, the object requires an entirely new set of conditions, and building those conditions took decades. The temporary museum was the holding pattern. The permanent museum was the solution. The gap between them measures how hard the conservation problem actually was. There is a counterpoint that a careful viewer should hold on to. The Vasa is often treated as a complete window into its period, and it is not. The bronze guns were taken in the 17th century. The ship never carried out a voyage, so it preserves no record of use, no wear from service, no accumulated repair. It is a snapshot of a completed warship, which is rare and valuable, but a snapshot is not a biography. The evidence documents a beginning that never became a career. Today, the outcome is measurable in a way few archaeological projects can match. Between the recovery in 1961 and the beginning of 2025, more than 45 million people have seen the Vasa. That figure changes the category of the find. A wreck that lost its own location because its cannons had already been stripped became one of the most visited archaeological objects in the world, inside a purpose-built museum in a Stockholm city park. So, what changed in our understanding? Before 1961, an early 17th-century warship was something reconstructed from documents, drawings, and fragments. After 1961, one existed as a largely intact physical structure with a construction window of 1626 to 1628 and a lost date of 10th August 1628. The failure that ended the ship's career in 1,300 meters is the same failure that froze it in place and made it readable. That is the lesson the site actually supports, and it is narrower than the legend around it. The Vasa proves that catastrophic failure can produce better archaeology than success, because success rewrites the object and failure preserves it. It also proves how quickly a location can be lost once the valuable parts are gone. and how much work it takes to keep something alive after you take it out of the water. The ship answered a question about how it was built. It has never fully answered the question of why it sank, and this evidence does not pretend otherwise. Visual reconstructions are illustrative. Facts and interpretations are based on the sources listed in the description.